Welcome to the Holy Sparks podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Saul K here, super excited and grateful for part 3 in our series of the righteous women of the Holy Land. So without further ado, let me introduce the woman properly. Lisa Biton was born and raised in Northern California. She holds a BA in Classical Studies and European History from the Santa Clara University and an MAT from USC. Lisa studied abroad at Ben Gurion University in Be'er Sheva in 2005 and fell in love with the land of Israel and her Israeli husband. She made aliyah in 2009 to the southern city of Kiryat Gat. Lisa has worked for AMHSI since 2010 as both a general studies teacher and an Israeli studies teacher. Since 2022, Lisa has served as the Dean of Israel Studies. Lisa and her husband have 3 children, and in her free time, she loves running, reading, and hiking. Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I should say Erev Tov. What time is it in Israel now?
It's 8 p.m., so on the edge of Erev.
Amazing. I love it. Okay. Walk us through your Jewish upbringing here in Northern California so we can get to know you.
So I was born in Redwood City, so I am a local Californian from the Bay Area. And it's a little complicated. My mom is Jewish and was raised in a conservative household. They kept kosher at home, but not necessarily out. And they went to services. And my grandparents were one of the first active members of Congregation Beth Jacob in Redwood City. So that's where my mom moved there in high school, and that's where they settled in. My dad isn't Jewish. He was born and raised in California, also in San Francisco. And he and my mom, they met at San Carlos High back in the 70s, local people. My upbringing was a mix. I went to Congregation Beth Jacob my whole childhood. I went to Hebrew school. I had my bat mitzvah there. But on the other hand, I celebrated Christmas and Easter, and half my family went to church and celebrated other holidays. So I grew up in this mixed world. And then when I was in high school, I started learning more and more about Judaism, about kind of the differences. And then I made the choice to go to Santa Clara University, as any good 18-year-old does. I decided based on 2 factors. One being that I really wanted to major in Latin, and no one's better to major in Latin than a Catholic university. And second was I wanted a Division I basketball team that I could work with. And Santa Clara hit both those things. And so I ended up there. And that really set me off on what I would call my Jewish journey, because it was the first place I ever dealt with outright anti-Semitism or outright questioning about who Jews were and what my belief was. And I decided to study abroad. I spent a month in Greece and 4 months here in Israel just to see my 2 sides. My dad's Greek, my mom's Jewish. I thought I would see what the different worlds were. And I spent a lot of time here deciding what I wanted my future to be and what I wanted my family to look like. And so that end of high school, college was a really formative time for me in my exploration of Judaism.
I love it. Okay, so I didn't know Santa Clara University, that's a Catholic university?
It is. It's in Santa Clara. It is on a mission, one of the missions.
Got it. Tell me, if you don't mind, what was the anti-Semitic experience or questioning that you had there that really pushed you in a certain direction?
So there's a couple examples. Santa Clara, as a Catholic university, you had to meet with a priest at the very beginning. The teachers were mostly priests. And my very first interaction, they had the list about you and what your majors were. And this priest looks at me and says, "But why are you here?" And I was like, "Basketball and Latin." That's what made me excited. And he said, "No, why are you Jewish in here?" And I was like, what? I'd never been so blatantly asked that. And I fumbled my way through it. And I ended up having the same professor for English too. And we had to write argumentative essays. And the question was about the atom bomb and whether or not we should have dropped the atom bomb. And the professor explained it. It's funny, isn't it, that Hitler created this war and kicked all the Jews out of Germany, and they came to the US and created the atom bomb and killed thousands of Japanese. It's funny how life works. And I remember sitting there thinking, did we just blame the Jews for all the atom bomb? Is that the logic? And in another example, we had to take a religion class, and the options were Jesus and marriage or religions of the book. So I thought religions of the book sounded a little bit easier than Jesus and marriage in my own personal life. And when we got to Judaism, we were studying Leviticus, and we were going through some of kind of the laws and kashrut, and a student raised her hand and said, "This seems really stupid and arcane, and why are we learning this?" And the teacher said, "No one keeps kosher anymore, but it's good to know where the roots come from." And wow. I remember, again, I didn't keep kosher back then, right? But I am pretty sure that's not true. And the teacher did a very good teacher thing of, why don't you research it and come back to us? So there's a lot of little things like that of just a non-understanding of who Jews were, and a constant questioning of why I was there and what my expectations were. It was also during the Intifada, less so in Santa Clara, but the Hillel there is actually a conglomerate of San Jose State and De Anza and Cupertino, all the different community colleges. And there was a lot of active anti-Semitism in those college campuses. Mine was more what I would call subtle anti-Semitism, just a lot of questioning of, why would you believe that? And why don't you believe in Jesus, kind of thing.
So interesting. Yeah. Being a current student at UC Berkeley, which I'll talk about a bit later, and being in Middle Eastern studies, that's my focus. I am the only person that asks those types of questions that you're asking. Well, actually, what you said is actually not true, because often the rest of the class, they literally have no idea. This is their first encounter with Judaism or Israel. And so what might seem an innocuous omission could be really subtle anti-Semitism, and it's really important. So kol hakavod for asking those questions, and for any college kids that are listening to this, it's really upon you to pause when you think your professor says something that's off, to call them out. It's really important, especially right now. So we'll talk more about that later, but that's great. I really appreciate the clarity around that. And so tell me, what was the moment when you decided to make aliyah, and why?
So I'm never quite as inspiring as I think other people are. I fell in love. I mean, there's two sides of it. I loved my time in Israel, and I felt at home here. And there were a lot of things about Israeli culture that I loved. Raising a family here, no offense to the Bay Area. In the Bay Area, everything is planned months in advance. Play dates are very organized. Everything's about the school and the education. And here in Israel, things are a little more communal. People show up at our house all the time, and my kids run free on the buses and the streets. So I always saw that as a benefit. The only reason I moved here is because I married an Israeli who hated America. We'll see if he listens to this. He had very strong feelings. We lived in the States for 2 years. Everyone told me he was marrying me for my green card. He was not interested. After about a year, he said, we have to try Israel and see what it's like. And I said, okay, 5 years I'll give you. And we've been here 15 now. But I always say, I think when people make aliyah, they do it with this huge, massive dream, right? It's going to be the perfect place, and it's the Holy Land. And I hate to tell you, we have to pay taxes here, and my kids still get in fights in school, and life is still life. I know. I think a lot of people make Yerida, they go home because they don't want to reconcile the two concepts, right? That Israel is this holy land, but also it's a place where we live and life happens. And I don't think I would have stayed if it wasn't for my husband, in the sense of having an Israeli spouse makes a lot of things easier. He speaks the language, and he understands the weird laws and how to buy a car and how to pay taxes. And I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm saying it made life a lot easier. And that was my big push over the hill.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring up, which the fantasy of living the Holy Land versus the day-to-day reality. And you're 3 out of 3 of the women that I've interviewed on this mini series were American natives that made Aliyah, and they all mentioned that in some way or another. And I think that's great that you're able to reconcile the two things. Tell me, if you can, what was your vision of your life to be moving towards Israel, and then reconcile it with the reality of what it is?
So I think my vision in a lot of ways in the big picture is the same as what it is. I'm a teacher. I've taught history my whole life, and I am passionate about teaching history and being able to be here in Israel, in a land that is steeped in history. My favorite story is that when my husband moved to California, before he got his work visa all figured out, he did some time volunteering at a Sanford dig, and they found a penny from like 1902. And they were so excited. My husband's like my grandmother's older than this. This isn't archaeology. And to be here and to be able to walk on Tel Gezer and pick up a piece of pottery that is 2,000, 3,000 years old I just love every bit of it. So this idea that I come here and teach history or be involved in Jewish Israeli education is still what I'm doing. And I'm passionate about that. And I'm passionate about the school that I work at. I think what the biggest difference is just the day-to-day, right? I still have to go to parent-teacher conferences, and I still have to, deal with traffic. And I think those are the frustrations, because we have this idea that, again, there's going to be no traffic in Israel because it's the Holy Land, and I won't get frustrated at stupid things, but that's not the case. We just had local elections also, and when you talk about local politics, they're the same. Are there potholes in the roads? Is there a sports team in our local city? And we're still having the same fights, right? Whether or not we're here or elsewhere.
I got it. And tell me, how did you get connected with AMHSI, and what does that stand for?
So it's AHMSI High School in Israel. I have a roundabout connection. My cousin studied abroad here in 2000, and my grandfather was a donor here back in the 90s, early 2000s. But I didn't really know about it then, which is, I think, silly because I would have been the ideal student for this program, but so be it. So when I moved here, I was first just looking for jobs that offered that offered teaching in English. And I came across AMHSI. And again, I started Latin as a niche ability. So they were looking for a Latin teacher, and there aren't that many of us in the world. So that's how I put my foot in the door. But again, since then, I've been doing general studies, and then I moved into Israel studies. So our program we offer programs from 4 weeks to 18 weeks. And we teach Jewish history, we say from Bereshit ad Akshav. So from the very beginning of Jewish history until today. And it's a chronological study. Half the week is spent in the classroom and half the week is spent on trips. And to me, that's just, I know I glow about my own program, but the idea that we could teach Herod in the classroom and then climb Masada and literally stand on Herod's buildings, to me is mind-blowing. Even to the average 16-year-old is pretty cool. So just being able to do that and show them, an important thing to me is just the train of history, right? That we look at anti-Semitism today, and it's not a unique event in world history. There are so many cycles of everything we've been through, and we can talk forever about what the pogroms were like. And if you lived through October 7th, there's a lot of similarities and those comparisons, and showing students that history isn't just in a book, right? There are people who live through it and have real experiences.
Okay, and is part of your school's mission, you bring kids over for these little immersion programs, or are these all people that are living there?
No, they're mostly Americans. They come here only for our program. And we have some Australians we work with, some British kids, English speakers, Canadians. But we have 2 tracks, one that are individual kids that come from all over the United States. And then let's say for our spring semester here right now, they come from all different public and private high schools. We actually have a kid from Palo Alto High here right now. And then we have our day schools we work with. So let's say Milken in Los Angeles, they will bring their whole grade over to study with us. So those are the 2 things we do, but they don't live here.
Great. And you said it really quickly, but 4 to 18 weeks, those are the lengths of the program?
Yeah, we offer about 25 programs a year. So lots of different options depending on what people are looking for.
Amazing. And how many kids are at the high school at any one given time, generally, if you can average it out?
So if we're not talking about today, because the war
Right.
has
We're
been a
gonna,
little complicated, on an average time, we average about 250. We see about 1,600 kids a year, and we're hoping to grow. We were steadily growing until the war hit. We're hoping that we will continue to grow.
great. And so and we're going to talk about pre and post October 7th. So pre-October 7th, what's the vision of AMHSI?
We call it just Alexander Muss or Muss.
Okay.
So the vision is so people always ask me 2 things. What kind of Jewish are you, and what kind of Zionist are you? Our school is what we call pluralist, non-denominational, which doesn't mean we have no religion. It means that we want students to experience a little bit of everything. My feeling is that most American Jews have a very narrow version of what it means to be a Jew, whether that's Ashkenazi, whether that's Californian reform, whether they grew up in a religious environment. They've never really sat through Carly Bachmanian or seen what a reform community in Israel looks like, or a conservative one. I always say we go down to Keturah, it's conservative, it's Masorti, and they tell the kids to put away their phones, and kids are like, but I thought this was conservative. We don't put away our phones in conservative synagogues. So just to see those differences, and it's important for me that kids in high school, I think it's the ideal age to push those boundaries and start thinking about what they want their lives to look like. And for me, that was my formative years, and I think that's like the key. They separate out from their parents, right? I followed my parents' want for so long. What does the future look like for me? And second is Zionism. Now, we're a school in Israel. We're Zionistic. There's not much to say about that, but it is important to me that my students come out with a wide view of what Zionism is. So I don't want kids to think that we don't question the Israeli government, that we don't question what happens in the army. Simply that at our very base, we believe that Israel has the right to exist. What that looks like, we're open for discussion. And, we talk about labor Zionism and cultural Zionism and political Zionism and what these different visions that were had about the state of Israel, and show students that, this word Zionism, besides your shirt, is being thrown around as a dirty word now. Oh, you're a Zionist? What does that mean? I can still question the prime minister and still say I'm a Zionist, and that does not contradict each other. And so those are 2 main components of our program, that we introduce kids to different forms of Judaism and different forms of Zionism, and then they come out of it with a way to have the words for what they feel for the future.
I love it. Yeah, and I think it's so interesting right now that when people say they're Zionist, it's almost that's why I got this sweatshirt, if you can't see it online. It says I'm a Zionist. And there's no disclaimer. There's no because in 2024 it's often followed by and or but or what. No, I'm a Zionist. I believe Israel has a right to exist. Period. Now, are there a lot of flavors of Zionism? Absolutely. Do I agree with everything the government does? No, I don't agree with everything the US
Yeah.
government does. Neither does anyone else. There's this ridiculous notion that because you are a Zionist, that you 100% agree with every. Get two Jews in a room and you have 14 opinions. It's good to clarify that and also just to have base definitions that kids can use in their lives. Okay, great. So talk us through also where the school is located and then what happened in and around October 7th.
So our main campus is in a place called Hod Sharon, which is about 20 minutes outside of Tel Aviv. That's what we would call in California a suburb of Tel Aviv. And we have a campus, it's what we call Pnimiyah, dormitory, kids sleep there. In the summer, we opened up a second campus in Be'er Sheva. Great time to expand and open up a second campus. But a big part of AMHSI is a part of JNF, of Jewish National Fund. And a big part of Jewish National Fund and me personally, is this idea of the periphery, that we want to support and expand into the periphery and not just give students a taste of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, but also, this is going to come off a bit snotty perhaps, but what real Israel feels, right? When you get out of these bubbles of big cities, what the experience is in the South. So going to Be'er Sheva was a big part of that for us. You know, I can tell you a little bit about what October 7th was. On October 7th, we had more than 100 students here in Israel. We had a day school and then our fall semester, and it was Simchat Torah. They were in Jerusalem for Simchat Torah. For both Yom Kippur and Simchat Torah, we take the students to Jerusalem to shul hop, right? To see, because again, if you've never experienced a Simchat Torah in an Orthodox synagogue or in Israel, it's a very different experience from what I grew up with, singing, dancing, lots of candy throwing. So to give them that experience. And part of my job is safety and security along with programming. They go hand in hand when you travel around in Israel. And so when the sirens started going off on Saturday morning, I was immediately already by 7 a.m. I was on the phone and talking to staff and teachers and madrichim and counselors and making sure that the students were being taken care of. The day itself was very complicated. We had guards. We have guards all the time when we travel. And 2 of the 3 were called up that day. So we had a mad scramble for trying to make sure that we had the right coverage. And then the big question, they're supposed to spend a second night in Jerusalem, and a big question of whether or not we bring them back to campus. Again, our campus is our safe space, right? You know, it's a gated campus as we know it's our area. We decided to bring them back after Shabbat had gone out. And then already on October 8th, we basically made the decision to send them home. And I've said this loud and clear, and I'll say it again and again. We did not send them home because we were scared. We did not think they were in any danger personally. We as a staff had been hit hard both by reserve duty and by personal loss. And we didn't know what the future looked like. It was like COVID in a weird way, right? Where like we were staring down the barrel of this unknown amount of time and future and not going on trips and who knows what that would look like. And that's why we decided to send them home. So already by October 10th, they had been on a plane. There was a charter plane. They were sent home. That afternoon, we already moved the first refugees, evacuees from Sderot and Ashkelon into our campus. So it was all very fast. And since then, we've really spent between October and January really thinking about our program and what does October 7th mean to our program? What does it mean in how we teach? What does it mean in what we teach? What experiences are the American students now coming with? And the background and the expectation, and what are they facing when they return? That's different than what it was on October 5th. And there is differences. And so that's been a big of our focus of, again, it's not changing the Jewish and Zionism aspect, but what questions are they going to face now in high school that maybe they were facing in college? And again, this pushback of anti-Israel apartheid, which is a word that we heard a lot during the Second Intifada and then fell out of favor, but people stopped using it. But now it's a word that's getting thrown around a lot. What do students need to know? And our new current campaign is called Must is the Answer. And that's the idea that the students need a way to speak, right? They need to be confident in their knowledge. And again, I'm not saying that Israel's perfect and that everyone should go back and not question anything Israel does, but just they need to go back and say, again, Israel has a right to exist. Did you know about UNRWA versus the different refugee populations? Did you know about the British mandate and what that means? And just feeling confident in their own knowledge. That's been a real big switch of ours.
Great. Is the school back in full operation? Are you at full capacity now, or how have things changed with regards to that?
So it's not exactly full. We are at low full. We are running programs again. So right now we have 2 programs in. I would say a lot of parents are very nervous about sending their kids, and we are seeing, it's not just us, across the board, Israel programming for this summer has seen a huge hit. So if you look at all teen program, us, BBYO, the different movements, NCSY, they're almost all seeing a huge hit. Typically we see about 500 to 600 kids a summer. We're seeing fractions of that for this coming summer. On the one hand, for us being able to show that we can hold programming and that it's meaningful programming and that the students are still going on trips and they're still experiencing things and that they're not in danger or afraid is important to us. But there is still a gap we have to cover, right? That convincing someone when you're watching news in America that it's safe here in Israel is a challenge often. There's this feeling, I think, when you watch news in America that I know Israel's a small country, but there's a feeling that it's all like this big, right? That something happens in the north and the whole country shut down. But that's really not what life is like. We are in a very different situation than we were 4 months ago.
And for perspective, if you lived outside of the United States and you just watched the news about the United States, you would think, and this is actually accurate, that there's a mass shooting every day, which means more than 4 people are killed, which is true, P.S. However, those of us that live here, we don't watch the news every day, and if you do, and you take those numbers, then you can't leave your house, right? So you got to keep in mind that even though Israel is in war currently, there's a lot of safety there. And in fact, many Jews are making aliyah right now. I think over 7,000, 8,000, I don't know the exact numbers, since October 7th, right? Israel, as they say, is the only country that during war, people go there instead of fleeing from it, right?
Yeah.
There's a couple things I want you to unpack, and I'm sure you've done this with your students, and there's many terms that are thrown around, and you mentioned the term apartheid, and I think you can probably dismantle that in 90 seconds. I would love to hear your version of that and how you're teaching that to the kids.
Part of them is experiencing it. A lot of the people they interact with are a variety of faith. I think the key thing people throw around with apartheid is Islam, is Muslims and Jews, and that's what I'll focus on, even though they interact with Christians also, but just as far as what they typically hear. We encourage the fact that the people they interact with are from a variety of faiths, whether that's the people we go through on trips. For instance, just last week, they were at a place called En Rafa, where they met with a woman called Yasmin, who is a British convert to Islam, who married a Palestinian local and brings them into the mosque and talks about Islam and talks about her life as a Muslim and her choice to send her kids to a Christian school and these different backgrounds. They interact with them we have bus drivers that we use all the time. We have bus drivers that we know and love and have communicated with for years. And typically these are Muslim bus drivers. So we make it a point that they talk to them. They ask them about their lives. They ask them about their kids. These drivers love to show you pictures. And the most important thing you learn in tourism is if your bus driver is happy, everything is good. So we make it a big point, right? That they get to know them as people, right? And on an individual basis. Beyond that, we teach them the history. You look at the government, right? The government has Muslims in it. An apartheid state would not have Muslims serving in government. They could become prime minister. Again, there's percentage challenges with that probably, but there's no legal challenge against it. And I was actually just talking to one of my teachers who is Turkish Jew. And so she was saying that in Turkey, apparently in the last couple of years, I didn't know this, Jews can't become police officers again. So there was a period where they could, and now they've taken that right away again. And that kind of thing doesn't exist in Israel, right? If we look at our military, Druze, Muslims don't have to serve in the army, but they can. And it's more of not putting people in situations that would hurt their community with Muslims than it is about we don't want them to serve with us. My brother-in-law just got out of Gaza this last Thursday, actually, after 120 days of fighting. And he speaks about his soldiers, Druze, Muslims, Bedouin, the whole crosswatch of Israeli society. You live here and you just experience it. It's not.
But wait, when you say that, sorry to interrupt, you say all of those people were in the IDF, is what you were just saying.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just to be clear.
To clarify. Yeah. Sorry. They're all his soldiers. He is the head of a unit and they were all his soldiers in the units, right?
Why were they fighting? This is a good thing to unpack. Why were Muslims fighting in Gaza, or Druze, which is, you have to understand, most Americans don't know what a Druze is. You just, oftentimes people think you're saying Jews when you're saying Druze. So just for a second, briefly unpack that as well. And yeah, why were they there? If
Druze are complicated to anybody because Druze strongly believe that the only people who know what Druze are in full are Druze. That's their rule. But Druze are a migrant community up in the north of Israel. They actually exist all along the Levant in Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. And they are really fascinating people. They believe in reincarnation for sure. They also are highly nationalistic in the sense that they believe, as part of their reincarnation, basically, that wherever they are born, they owe that land and they are willing, and I don't want to say happy to, but it's part of their culture that fighting for the society you live in, whether or not that's Jewish or Muslim or anywhere, the Druze in Syria, they all fight to wherever they're from. So they are highly decorated soldiers, and you see them all across Israel fighting. The Bedouins in the south also have large numbers of people who fight in the army. If you see anything about October 7th, many Bedouin were hurt or killed in the initial onslaught. Rahat is not that far from Gaza, and there's horrifying stories of Muslim Rahat Bedouin women in full Muslim dress who were murdered on the streets outside of Rahat. Hamas didn't care whether or not the answer, when one of this woman's husband said, she's a Muslim woman, you can see her, like, don't hurt her. And then Hamas's response was, she's a traitor to the people because you live in the land of Israel. But they don't see that. They live here and they work here and they go to school here and they're part of our community. Part of what I do also is when I take students to places, not that we don't like places like the Bedouin tents, they're good for an experience, but I try to take them into Rahat or into a place called Wadi Atir and really learn about what the Bedouin communities are trying to build for themselves. The education system, Wadi Atir, if you don't know what it is, I recommend you look it up. It's an organization partially funded by JNF that helps Bedouins take science and adjust their herding ways into better scientific ways. So for instance, they raise sheep, and it's not a grass. I'm sorry, I'm not an agriculture person, but there's a kind of grass, a specific kind of grass the sheep eat, not a grass, that they have genetically engineered to have more protein for the sheep so that they can keep with their nomadic tendencies, but they can use science to improve their flock. So these different things that take science and really allow the Bedouin to live the life they've always led, right? And to live it better. These people feel like they're fighting for Israel and they live in Israel. One of the clearest examples, if anyone is really into social media, Nas Daily, if you want to follow him, he did a whole fascinating piece on how he feels as a Palestinian Israeli and why he chooses to define himself as Israeli and that challenge. Again, I'm not saying everyone's like that, but there are plenty of people plenty of non-Jews who feel that Israel is their home and would fight for it.
Great. Okay, there's tons of content there. You can rewind the tape and unpack all of that. So two other libels that I would like you to demystify or delegitimize. Number one, that Israel is committing genocide, and number two, that Israel is a white colonialist state, which I know you living there, you probably find that funny to hear, which is why you're laughing. But for people here in America and certainly on college campuses, this is a trope it's off. But I would like you to unpack either one and both.
So I'll start with genocide, although I'll probably keep it shorter. Here's my feelings. Again, my brother-in-law is a high-ranking officer in the military. I don't want to say I've seen the back workings because I'm not in the military and I have no idea what he actually does, but I know who he is and I've seen him in some form of action. And I know how much effort he makes to keep his soldiers safe and civilians safe. Now, I live in Kiryat Gat. We hear my windows shake with the bombings when things happen in Gaza. There's basically, you want to know geography of Israel, there's basically a flat plain between me and Gaza. So even though I'm about 15, 20 kilometers from Gaza, everything reverberates here. And I will tell you, there are a lot of nights when I sit in bed and just feel terrible and think about the poor Gazan innocent civilians who are starving and can't get food. War is a terrible thing. And I also have seen videos that my brother-in-law's GoPro has taken and the horrors that he has seen of booby-trapped houses, of people pretending to be civilians and attacking them and setting up, again, horrible things. And I know firsthand accounts of this. And as a Californian, I always say, I'm not always necessarily liberal, but there's a part of me that's always San Franciscan. There's a part of me that will always kind of be that bleeding heart liberal. I don't always know how to use that both sides, but on the one hand, it's not a genocide. We're not going out to massacre people. And again, you can look at the numbers. If we are being a genocidal nation, the Palestinian population has multiplied exponentially since the founding of the state of Israel. That's not a genocide. Could we be better? I don't know. I'm not in the army, but again, I know what they try to do, and I know how difficult it is and the moral complications that people are going for, the soldiers themselves who are, I've spoken to soldiers who have talked about, you see these old men dressed up and you want to help them and you go to help them and then they blow themselves up. And how do you then go to the next guy and help them when you've seen your best friend die in that same kind of situation? And that, I don't know how anyone does that, honestly. That's just the horrors of war. But for sure, I strongly believe it is not genocide. And I think there are plenty of genocides in the world that people are ignoring, and plenty of ethnic conflicts, if we don't want to go to the use of the word genocide, other ethnic conflicts that for sure are going on. So I do think that's one of the harder ones, because I don't want to minimize the people who have died, because for sure there is starvation going on and there are challenges. Is that all Israel's fault and are we doing it on purpose? No.
Nowhere in Israel's governing doctrines does it say we must eliminate XYZ people. It's actually exactly the opposite. Okay, what about our white colonialist state narrative?
So that's something I'm super, super passionate about. This is like one of my biggest rants about life on two levels. One is something I hear a lot is go back where you came from. And then on the other hand, we're hearing certain runners in the States who are saying, we're going to kick out all the Jews because they don't belong in America. Me personally, I could always go back to where I came from, which would be California, I guess. I could bring my kids there. My husband's family is from Morocco, and they don't hold Moroccan passports because their Moroccan passports were taken from them when they were kicked out of Morocco in the 50s. So where is he supposed to go back to, right? Now, we did a DNA test a couple years ago, just for fun bits. And my husband is genetically Italian, Moroccan, and Levant, basically thirds. He's from this area, right? And, this chunk of land. And half of Israel is Mizrahi. Half of Israel is from this land. Forget the very basic of go back to where you came from. Even if we take my Jewish side, they're going back to Poland? Is that really what we're saying? Because nothing ever happened there to them. There wasn't a reason why they fled, obviously, between the wars.
But besides the go back to where you came from, which is it's a adjacent concept to that, it's just what I'd like you to talk about is the demographic makeup of Israel. That's most useful when you're talking about that.
Again, about half of Israel is Sephardic, Mizrahi Jews, which means that they come from North Africa, from Morocco, from Tunisia, even into Syria, Yemen. My husband, his whole family, a lot of people I work with, there are people who are, my husband always jokes, as a Moroccan, does he get to pick the white box or the African box? Whereas his North African Czech Berber box. Beyond that, I live in Kiryat Gat, a large percentage of Kiryat Gat is Ethiopian. The Ethiopian aliyah has been up in the last couple of years after even the big push in the 80s and 90s. There are a wide variety of races. And my mom always makes fun that there's no blondes in my kids' class. Perhaps there's less blondes than others, but all sorts of other races and backgrounds. We have Indians in Kiryat Gat, a very large Indian, I mean by actual India, an India community, Indian Jews who have been here since the 50s, a very interesting, slightly different community and history. The population is not how we define white. It's complicated, but it's not white in any majority way, shape, or form. And one thing I've talked to my students a lot about, especially when we talked about like Black Lives Matter a couple years ago, when that was like really at its height, is that this version of race in Israel is not perfect. And there are a lot of comparisons to the US as far as a white elite and an Ashkenazi elite, but that doesn't negate the fact that the majority of the population isn't this Ashkenazi elite. And in the past couple of years, it's really become, I want to say cooler in the ways maybe similar to some of the states to acknowledge this. So for instance, Mimuna is a North African holiday at the end of Passover. Basically, for those of you who don't know, in North Africa, they were really close to their neighbors and they would sell their chametz to their neighbors. And then at the end of Pesach, as a celebration for buying it back, they would celebrate with a big party that included mukletot, which are like crepes, and big parties. They would use up the flour. And so my in-laws have always celebrated. I've celebrated with them. But a couple years ago, Israel made it a national holiday. So now it's one of I think it's 3 nights a year when you can play music till 4 in the morning, right? There's noise ordinances except for Yom Ha'atzmaut and Lag Bomer, but just going to show this rise or acceptance of non-Ashkenazi normative holidays and celebrations. There's a fascinating community right next to me. There's a community called Beit Israel. So my neighbor is a guy by the name of Moshe Solomon. He's currently a Knesset member. He's an Ethiopian, and he ran a synagogue here in the city. And he discovered that They couldn't get a minyan for shacharit, but they get a minyan all the rest of the day. So he went around to the community and was like, dude, why aren't you getting up for shacharit? Why could you come the rest of the day? And these older men of the community were basically saying, we don't speak Hebrew. In Ethiopia, we were the center of the community. We were the pillar of everything. Actually, the word for the male adult in the house is the same. It's called a gojo. It's the same as the pillar of the center of a house. It's that same kind of imagery. And they said, what do we have here? We're nobody. Our kids speak Hebrew and we don't. Our kids are educated. We can't get jobs. And you want me to wake up at 6 a.m. to go to shacharit? And then what? So he turned around and actually created a farm where they farm authentic Ethiopian peppers and spices. And it has turned into an educational center where people can go and learn about Ethiopian culture, and they can build these gojos. They can learn Amharic. It's a whole separate language. They can learn about the fact they don't celebrate Purim and Hanukkah and why not. And they can learn about the challenges of the Ethiopian aliyah. And it's become really a place where they can take back their religion, right? There was a period when a lot of Ethiopian teens wanted to whitewash themselves, right? Wanted to become Israeli and normative. And now really it's this feeling of, no, we can celebrate our past and our history and still be Israeli and still be a part of this community. So if you ever get a chance to go there, it's a really fascinating place and I recommend everyone do it.
Wow, that is fascinating. Thank you so much for this. And we're going to start to wrap up, but talk a little bit about what is your high school doing differently now, and what is its vision now moving forward based on what's going on?
So right now we've named this a solidarity semester or possibly year, depending on how things go, in the sense that we've incorporated a lot of volunteering, a lot of giving back. So far this semester, we've only been in just about a month, and they've made a barbecue for soldiers. They've done a strawberry field, working in the fields. They've gone and spoken to hostage families and really experienced what it is. I will say one of my big faults as a teacher is I am a chronological teacher in everything I say and do. I strongly believe in it. But even I have taken a step back and said that we're running a dual program right now, and that we can't ignore what's going on in the world. We can't ignore October 7th. So we are continuing our kind of traditional chronological strain, at the same time running a kind of parallel track of what's in the news and what is going on in the world and what is going on at The Hague and what is going on in the UN and what is going on in the US. So there's these two parallel tracks. That's a new thing that we are working on. And I think it's been really successful and impactful. I will say we're going to Poland next week for our first time since October 7th. And I am curious myself as to how that will feel and go. And I'm not sure that we will know until we get there as our own staff. So that's been our big shift. And again, for the future, just really looking at American teens aren't the same as when AMHSI started in 1972. It's a long time ago, both from a practical technology exposure kind of level, but also from what they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis, right? What kind of questions they're being asked and how they might want to answer, and how they see themselves in college campuses and even in their high school campuses. So really rethinking what tools do they need to go back to their hometowns and feel that they aren't being bombarded, that they know how to answer. And again, I always say that you don't always want to get in the fight. You don't always need to get into the fight, right? If someone comes at you screaming, it was an apartheid state, and they're like going to punch you in the face, most of the time it's not worth it. Walk away, save yourself. We had an incident in Denver. We had our Jewish National Conference, and someone screamed at one of my students, "Go back to Auschwitz where you came from." And the student reacted, and the response was, feel that anger, but they're not going to change. There's nothing you can say to that person. There's nothing you can do to that person that's going to make them change their mind in this moment. And therefore being able to take a step back and say, we are talking to the people who are questioning, the people who see the word genocide, but don't necessarily know what to believe, or who have seen different images and you want to talk to them. That's who we're really speaking to. And so getting students to acknowledge that the Facebook fight, right? You can't argue with everyone on social media and win the fight. But you need to know that you believe in what you believe in, and that you have the words to express that and to know when to walk away. So giving students that ability is really important to us.
I love it. I was literally last night talking with my wife. I said, we all need a toolkit right now. Adults, parents, college students, high school students. Okay, this is where we're at in the world. These are the top 10 things you're probably going to encounter. Here are some suggestions and resources for how to deal with it. This is great. And I'm actually doing a Zoom series for UC Berkeley students starting next week, which I'm going to book you for because I think you're going to be amazing and you have exactly what I'm looking for. Okay, moving forward, talk about two things. What is your vision for Israel? What do you see in the future? What do you want to see? And what do you want to experience?
So I'm unsure on a daily basis. What I do want is a peaceful place for my kids to grow up in. My kids are approaching army age and things are very real for me. My 14-year-old speaks a lot about what her choices are going to be in the future. And if I could see her, I have strong feelings personally about national service, and I strongly am just in general believe in things like national service and as a concept. But if her national service could be a little more peaceful, I'd be perfectly fine with that. I also do think that Israel needs to come with a reckoning of itself in the fact that October 7th happened and the war is happening. And at some point, hopefully, the war will end. And then we have to figure out what we're doing next. And clearly, whatever happened before October 7th didn't work. So what that looks like, we just have to be honest with ourselves that we have to be open to different ideas and to trying new things and to finding new people to speak to. We can't exist in a vacuum because as much as we belong on this land, other people have lived on this land also. So how do we balance that ability? So I hope that Israel can open itself up to that and that it can have those dialogues. Israelis love arguing with each other. I hope they can open that up to the greater wide world. I think we have a tendency to say, why should we include anybody else because we're Israel? So I hope that we have the ability to move beyond. I don't want to say forget it because, again, as someone who lived through it, it was horrific and will mark me forever. But to be able to take that and still say, we have to move forward and find a better future because that's what I need. That's what we all need.
I believe you have a fundraiser, something that you want to mention. There'll be a link to talk about that. And how can people help?
Yeah, I'd be happy. As I said, all travel in Israel right now is complicated. I strongly believe in teen education, and I think bringing kids here to Israel to experience it and to see it gives them tools, just like you said, in their toolkit, far beyond anything they could ever teach in the United States, and experiencing it and seeing it and touching it. As I said before, I'm a big hiker. Walking the land with your feet it changes you. It really does. And so giving students that opportunity is everything to me. And we are currently running a fundraiser for our school because we are in, I'll say, a difficult situation. It is similar to the Intifada, perhaps even COVID, in the fact that our numbers are down, and we want to give students the opportunity to come. Finances for a lot of students are a big challenge. So we want to give an amazing, in-depth, meaningful program to all students, and that requires scholarships and that requires support. So as I said, our current fundraising is called Must is the Answer. And so I encourage you to look at the link. I am happy if anyone would like to email me or to look on my social media and ask me questions. I'm happy to answer questions about the school. The money will go towards student scholarships and to the school to ensure that we can continue to give this in-depth education that will allow students to return to the United States or to Canada, England, wherever, with a toolkit that will allow them to flourish and grow. I'm always happy to point people to alumni who speak, highly of our program and are in all sorts of areas of the United States now.
Amazing. Okay, so there'll be a link below wherever you see this or hear this. And first of all, I want to say thank you so much for your time. I know you're very busy and you have a full family over there and a lot going on. And I think the work that you're doing is incredible. So tell me, this is the question I always end with. What do you feel the Jewish world needs now most and why?
So this is probably an answer that everyone should expect of me, but education and community. I am a strong believer that my biggest worry is that students or young people will grow up without any understanding of what Judaism is or means. And I don't mean it, again, that in one specific way, but it's almost like a game of telephone. If you start a game of telephone, you know the word and you're sharing it with the next person. By the time you get to the fifth generation, the word becomes garbled. And so I feel that way with Judaism, right? That people say, my grandparents were religious, I'm less religious. And one thing I always find interesting that parents send their kids to us because they say, we don't live a religious life. My kid doesn't have much exposure, so you do it. And I just don't think that's the answer. I think I'm not saying any sort of religious point or view, but to expose everyone, students, adults of all ages, to the beauty that is Judaism in so many ways, and to what it means to keep Shabbat. There's this whole funny thing in San Francisco I always laugh at, that they have the day without technology, where they say, turn your phones off for a day. That is Shabbat, right? And again, I'm not saying you have to go to the extreme, but taking that time and saying, we're going to have a Friday night meal and we're going to put our phones away and we're going to focus on each other and have a conversation with our family and with our kids and disconnect from our watches and everything that beeps at us. I just think it's so important. And to study these things of what does it mean to question what you believe in? What does it mean to think about what I'm eating and what I'm doing in my daily life and how I'm dressing and the impact I'm making? That's just most important to me. And something else I feel not everyone has growing up is that same sense of community, right? That you have a community you can turn to and support. And when I was at Congregation Beth Jacob, like this idea again that they were having like these meals, right? They weren't even in the services, but that they had come to celebrate in that space and to embrace in that space together is just something I think we miss in a lot of places in America, right? In Israel, I think because we tend to be less car reliant, there's people tend to hang out in their communities more. But being able to say, I know who my neighbors are and I know who my community is and I know where to go when I need childcare or when I need a bag of sugar or anything, I think that's such an important aspect. So for me, education and community are by far the two most important things. And that's why I do what I do, because again, I strongly believe in it. And I think it's really our path to the future.
I love it. Lisa, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you. And I always want to end with a blessing, and that Hashem should bless you and Alexander Moss School with a lot of an influx of students, knowing that it's a safe place to go, knowing how impactful coming to the land, learning the history of the land, and walking the land can be. And I love that it's a pluralistic environment, because that's really the world that we are in. All of us, we're in a pluralistic world. So that you are espousing those principles and giving kids tools to deal with the world is so important. So I just want to bless you with a lot of success, Parnasa, Simcha, and Shalom, and we hope to see you very
Amen.
soon.
Amen.